Done. Got it.
Thank
Great.
you. Sorry to disturb.
No, that was absolutely necessary. Thank you very much, Marilla. So just a few words from me on behalf of Helm. As the program leader for this project that is unfolding and being in the very, very good hands of Marilla and Alan from Sadie, to whom we will hand over this workshop, I just want to extend a very, very warm welcome to all of you. I've seen some of the chats. Durban's looking lovely, and all around the country. I think everybody is on board, irrespective of what the weather may be like or load shedding. So we are very, very pleased to have you all here, and thanks for coming back and being part of the program as it unfolds. From my side, I simply wanted to answer one question that was asked at the last seminar, and that is people were asking, what are the expectations of people who are being brought on board as the reference group and experts, and what is the expectation of those who are being brought on as master trainers? And Marilla and Alan helped clarify that for us in the interim. And really, in this stage of the program, we are working on the design features and working towards the outcomes we want to achieve for the program. The expectations of these two groups is the same. So whether you're on board as an expert / reference group person, or whether you're on board as a master trainer, many of your experiences and range of expertise really overlap. And in terms of the master trainers, you are the group that we are going to hope to remain, who will want to remain as we both develop the program, but also train the other master trainers who are going to come on board eventually. The group that we have now is not going to be sufficient to do the rollout across almost 900 people across the country at different institutions. The reference group, we are really going to be drawing on your expertise from time to time, but your role in the program is not the same as the master trainers who will be actively involved in training the next group of master trainers who come on board, and then eventually helping to work, to train, to facilitate this program with the lecturers who will eventually come on board. I see Marilla nodding her head, so I think I got that right. I see Alan also nodding his head because they really conceptualize this part of the program. So a very warm welcome to all of you. And at the moment, for the next couple of weeks of workshops, we are all equals, we are all in here, just with one role, and that is to make sure we have the principles for this program clearly identified and workshopped, the outcomes that we want to have for the people who will participate in it, clearly identified. And if you have any other questions, to please just ask them as we go along in the chat, or via email if it's a bit longer and you want to ask more detailed questions. So welcome aboard, everyone. I don't know if Oliver or Michelle want to say anything, but I know that Marilla and Alan are keen to get started. Oliver or Michelle, anything from you?
Thanks, Denise. Nothing from my side.
Yeah, I actually have something to say, although I planned not to. Good morning, everyone. It's all great to see you again. It's so excited you're back with us, and this is going to be good fun. We say this is really a pioneering project, so we're really excited you're participating today, and thanks so much to the team for organizing it and for Marilla and Alan's facilitation. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you later.
Thank you. So back to you, Marilla and Alan.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and a warm welcome from me. I'm just trying to get my PowerPoint up onto this screen. And I'm asking it to share, and it's not sharing.
It'll get there.
Well,
Something we always put on while Marilla is finding us is the netiquette. But because all of you are such old hands at this, you do know what the netiquette is. And for me, the most important part of the netiquette is really about having patience with technology. Once it's up and running, it just gives us so many advantages. But getting it up and running sometimes takes a bit of time. There we go.
okay. So I hope everyone can see that now. Okay,
Yes,
great.
thank you. I can, right.
Okay, just trying to get it into a full screen. Not sure I'm asking it to do a slideshow, and I'm asking it to do a full screen, and it's not.
It's the bottom next to the sizing thing. There is the full screen button right at the bottom of the screen on the right hand side.
Really?
Or
Lower
down,
down,
down.
lower down.
Now
It's the one that looks like a little chalice.
It's like a pull down screen.
Ah, so you see pull down screen.
No,
I
no,
see
no.
chalice with wine.
Yes. There, click.
That's the one.
Not today.
Not today. No
Well,
wine, no pull down.
that's unusual, because normally when one just goes into slideshow and you start from the beginning,
from the
it
beginning.
actually starts a full screen. Okay, well, I'm not going to fiddle around and make this work if it doesn't want to work. I'm just going to use the PowerPoint as it is at the moment.
Okay.
Sorry, don't want to keep anybody any longer. So a very warm welcome from all of us, and we're really looking forward to today's workshop in particular, because it's really starting the series of workshops, which, as Denise has pointed out, are intended for us to start engaging with some of the basic principles of program and course and materials design and the use of technology, which will be foundational to our preparation of the ULDP program. So this is very much the inception phase, when as a team, all the people who are here today, and the USEF people, the SADI people, and all the university representatives will work collaboratively to actually engage in a process for taking this whole program forward. As the facilitators of this program, we of course are putting forward and proposing an approach, but the approach is up for discussion and critical input. So just a very quick overview of the program. Just let me do a sound check. Can everybody hear me clearly? Sound all right?
Yes, from my side.
Okay, great, thank you. So we're just starting now with the introductions and welcome. I think we did all introduce ourselves at the first workshop, which we held 2 weeks ago. Now, I'm not sure whether today we have got any new people who weren't at the workshop, and if we have got some new people who weren't at the introductory workshop, you're most welcome. Please, if everyone would just put their names on their profile photos, and if you can add your institution, that would also be nice. When we speak, it would be great. I know most of us will keep our videos off just because of it's a bandwidth issue, but when you speak, it would be nice to see you, if possible, just to put a face to the voice. And I'm sure as we proceed, we will get to know each other, and we'll be working in some breakaway rooms over not only today, but over the next few weeks. So over time, we will all get to hopefully be on a first name basis and know each other a bit better. I'm not going to spend time introducing everybody today because we did engage last time, but again, welcome to everybody. The program for today basically is just to start with looking at an overview of this inception phase, which is this particular set of workshops. I think it's if I remember correctly, I think it's 9 workshops, which will take us through to from now to the end of July, with a break in between in June, and after that we'll be looking, so that's the inception phase, which will be discussed. Then we'll be having an actual overview of what this workshop will entail. And then there will be a process of facilitating. So it's this online workshop, all the materials, the entire set of workshop materials and activities has been built into a web-based program which Alan has designed and put together. And Alan and I will be facilitating this at various points today and over this period from now until the end of July. Today's session.
Can I just say that Marilla wrote the documentation
for this one?
So it was a collaboration.
Yeah. So I put the content together, and Alan put it into the very fancy high-tech format, which has made it really accessible and easy to use, as you will all see. I'm assuming, Michelle, that you've sent the link to everybody for the program.
Not yet. I'll do it shortly, given our Zoom issues this morning. So it will go out soon.
Okay, good. So that would be great. Everyone will receive a link to the actual web-based workshop. The workshop is set to continue right until 1 o'clock, and we plan to have a break around. I've put here around about 10:30. Just depending on the flow of the workshop, but at about that point, we'll definitely have a half-an-hour comfort break, just so that everybody can really get up and stretch their legs and have a cup of coffee and whatever. And then after the break, we'll continue looking at and engaging with the workshop materials and activities in the online format. Okay, so for those of you who were in the workshop about 2 weeks ago on the 26th of April, we did look at the overarching purpose of the University Lecturers Development Program, but I thought it might just be useful to recap a lot of stuff. We talked about a lot of stuff on that at that last session, and also there may very well be new people on board today. So just very, very briefly to remind ourselves that the overarching principle of this project is to provide professional development, learning opportunities to lecturers and associated teaching staff to improve their knowledge and skills and attitudes to teaching and learning and assessment, and also to focus to a slightly lesser extent in the initial phase, but also certainly to focus on research and on using technology to support and develop learning. The focus of next week's workshop is very much on using technology to support learning, and that is Alan's field of expertise, and that will be the focus for next week. As discussed in workshop 1, in particular, this current inception phase of the ULDP program has got sort of is divided into 3 sub-phases or 3 components, if you like. And the first component is the foundational one, which includes the 2 workshops, today's one, which which has as its focus learning design, in particular using an activity-based approach to pedagogical design. And next week's workshop, which Alan will take, which is learning with technology rather than learning from technology. And we won't get into that now because that's for next week. A second and important aspect, so it's about understanding or agreeing on a set of design principles and agreeing on a process for how technology will be used to support that process. After that, there are a number of other important fundamental principles that we need to agree on, and in that next step, there will be 3 workshops, including a workshop on the use of open educational resources, in other words, OER, looking at how one can use OER to strengthen teaching and learning, of how to identify it, how to adapt it, how to use it. Also talking a little bit about the licensing processes, because it's actually important that materials are made available for the greater good. I think one of the key principles that underpins the ULDP program is the principle of collaboration and sharing. And I think it's a particularly wonderful moment that, you know, we have literally involved all the universities in this country in this process, and that we work in a spirit of openness and sharing and collaboration in order to develop the best possible programs with the richest possible content and approach, and that whatever comes out of this in terms of the materials that are made available, that these are also made as widely accessible as possible, and that can be done and promoted through the use of open educational licensing. Doesn't mean that the copyright won't be owned by Helm, but that Helm would give the rights to everyone to use the materials freely, which is obviously a way of maximizing the impact of the courses and materials that will be developed. There are a number of other fundamental principles we will have to engage with, including, you know, what really are, you know, the outcomes that we want to achieve through this program. What will the notional learning hours be? What kind of mode of provision we'll engage with, etc. So that will be covered in our process of agreeing on those kinds of principles in the following 3 workshops. And then this inception phase will end with the design-based research process, which will include approximately 3 workshops and 3 iterations in which we will agree on the competency outcomes of the ULDP program. So that, in fact, is really the heart of the matter. That's the final big outcome that we want to achieve in this inception phase, is to agree on a set of competency outcomes in order to be able to then move towards the next phase of the ULDP program, which will then be the actual starting to think about the designing of actual components of the program. So this is very much the planning stage, if you like, the planning and preparation, which is, of course, the stage that one starts any program at, and that is at the planning stage and at the very beginning. Participant groups, Denise has spoken to us about that already in her introduction, and at the moment, as she has indicated, while the role of the expert reference group will probably change as the program unfolds, at the moment we are all kind of working together very much as a group of master trainers that will work to agree on these principles and approaches and to design the actual curriculum for other master trainers, because in total the program envisages having approximately 100 master trainers. We are starting it with an initial group of about 25. So we will be responsible together for developing both the kind of curriculum and content in the program for the master trainers, as well as, so it's a kind of cascade, a mini cascade model, as well as the curriculum for the lecturers. And here, and I have, it will come back to it and emphasize it as we go throughout the program, but I think what is important to understand conceptually at the outset is that this is about us developing a program for lecturers. It is not for students. So the beneficiaries of this program are going to be lecturers, professional development of lecturers. And of course, the ideal is that if lecturers own teaching practice strengthens and improves and it enables quality learning, then of course the students will be the ultimate beneficiaries of this program. But the target group for this particular program are lecturers. And this will lead us into phase one, where the trainers will then be responsible for the piloting of the I think somebody's got a, thank you, if you don't mind muting. So the trainers, the master trainers will be the people who move into the next phase of the program, which will, of the ULD program, which is actually phase one, because this is just the inception. Then phase one will be the development of programs, actual development of the programs based on the competencies agreed, and then the piloting of the programs with other master trainers and eventually with lecturers. So going into the actual objectives of today's workshop, really one big overarching objective, which is to consider the learning design principles that may be used to enhance academic development and promote quality teaching and learning. And then just a little bit to look at what we will do and how we will do it. And I think what is important here is that in exploring the principles of learning and teaching, we are looking at this across all modes of delivery. So this will be foundational to any mode of delivering, whether we deliver our courses, some of them or all of them, through contact or face-to-face mode, or in a blended mode, or fully online. The design principles that underpin these courses remain the same. Of course, there are certain considerations that need to be factored into online learning that are different, for example, to face-to-face, but the design principles are the same. We will be today looking briefly and engaging with the theory of how people actually learn, because we feel that that's an important starting point to understand how people learn. And then once we've had a broad conceptualization of how people learn, to move into designing that enables and maximizes learning. The workshops, content and activities are all prepared in a web-based format, which we've already highlighted, and I think Michelle has just sent everyone the link. And so as soon as I'm finished this section, we will be moving into, we'll be looking at that, the web-based format, and working with that throughout today, or well, throughout this morning. And just to say that eventually this particular site will be linked to Helm's Canvas platform, which they intend to set up. And what will be important is that it will be made available on an ongoing basis. So you'll be able to revisit the site. Well, once you have the link to the workshops, you'll be able to go back to them at any point. But once they are linked also onto the Canvas platform, there will be other possible options for ongoing fora or discussions or posting stuff on around the workshops onto the Canvas platform. And you'll be able to revisit these workshops at any time, download readings, engage with activities, and particularly for people who may not be able to attend a certain workshop. I think it's been highlighted that participation in all the workshops is really ideal, and we would like people to stay the course, as it were. But we know that you know, there are inevitable other commitments, and people may not be able to attend absolutely 100% of these workshops, in which case they will be able to still participate and engage and complete all the activities by going onto the web-based format. And then also, we'd really like to highlight the fact that we would like people to engage with this whole process and the examples and the activities, both because we feel that that's the best way to internalize learning is through engagement, but also to provide feedback to us and to Helm, so that we can, you know, really hone the program into something that is really useful and fit for purpose. As indicated, Alan and I will facilitate this. Although it's a web-based online program, it will be a facilitated one, but we'll have areas in which you'll be working, sometimes through activities on your own individually and sometimes in a group. And that's why we were talking about breakaway groups earlier on. And a point that we wanted to make was that, to a large extent, that this workshop is intended to model some of the key learning design principles that we are promoting as our approach, such as an activity-based approach to learning. And as I said, the workshop will then give people the opportunity to engage in active learning. And at 2 points, we will go specifically into breakout rooms, and that will be at activity number, the first activity and the last activity. Sorry, is that it? And yes, finally, just to say, please feel free to interject, to ask questions in the workshop, to post questions in the chat, and really hope that, you know, would like to really encourage everyone's full participations to really make this process as rich as possible. So before opening the actual website, are there any questions? Would anyone like to engage at this point around anything that has been said so far? Anyone, any questions? Okay, well, as questions bubble up to the surface, please don't hesitate either to put them into the chat or to just stop and pop up. Heidi, thank you. Sorry, please go ahead, Heidi, if you'd like to show yourself. I see a hand up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I just asked a question earlier on in the chat. You were talking about the fact that one can have it hybrid, fully contact or fully online. And just from a regulatory point of view, I mean, universities are, I don't know if the correct term is registered as contact. I mean, I think UNISA is the only one that's registered as distance. How does one reconcile all of that? I mean, I understand that if you have synchronous learning, that it's not distance learning. Is that what you meant by it? But just, I'm a lawyer by training, so I constantly have questions about the regulatory environment.
Okay, so I think there are two ways of looking at it. The first is to remind ourselves again that the courses that are going to make up the ULD program are not for students. So this is professional development for lecturers. And the regulations around how universities are accredited for offering programs, I don't think pertains in this instance to the nature of or the mode of professional development that is offered within the institution for staff.
Okay, no, that's fine. Then I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about sort of how institutions go about with education of the students. If it's for lecturers, I agree. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's only for this.
Can I just say something? The processes that I use and have used with students in PC laboratories online is not an online course, because the tool of the computer is being used as a mediator to learning. And so I think that's where we must make the distinction between when somebody is sitting on its own at a distance. And the one of the interesting points about the way we design is that Sadie comes from a distance education background, but our processes can be used both at a distance and in a blended or in a different way of using technology to support learning.
Thanks. I think the other thing that COVID has shown us, and I understand exactly where Heidi is coming from, because in order to have your programs accredited as an institution, you have to indicate whether they are whether they're being offered through distance provision or whether they are being offered in a face-to-face. And there are various formulae as to that determine whether something is deemed to be contact or not contact, etc., whether it's deemed to be distance or not distance, how much content is self-independent study, how much is mediated or facilitated, etc. So there are regulations around university program offerings. But having said that, I think there's been quite a big shift since COVID, because we've been forced to offer programs which were not initially designed or accredited as online programs. We've been forced to offer them either in a blended mode or in an entirely online mode at certain points during the pandemic. And I think what that has shown us is that given the massive pressure on institutions to enroll more and more students, and the immense strain that many universities are experiencing in terms of resources and capacity to offer programs to such large groups, it is quite likely that we will be moving more and more into the future on including some online components in all our courses, or possibly even moving into the flipped classroom kind of mode where students do some of their preparation at work at home, and then in class content that has been engaged with independently will be problematized and discussed, etc. So I think there's probably going to be a greater move towards a more blended form of learning going forward. Roy and then Nazreen. Roy, please feel free to speak.
Thank you, Madam. What I'd like to know is, since this program is going to be offered to lecturers, is this going to be a program that lecturers will be paying for? Or is this just a program that's being presented as part of the capacity building? Because to my previous speaker, I think this is where the issue of the distance education comes in. I mean, if this program is going to be paid for and if it's running as a distance mode, then, you know, we have to really think about it differently. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. No, I'm speaking now on behalf of Helm, and Helm people are welcome to please chip in here. But this program will not, nobody will have to pay for it. This is a commitment by USAF to ensuring the professional development of lecturers in our institutions, with the purpose of improving teaching and learning, and ultimately supporting greater student success in our institutions. So as far as I understand, and please correct me, the Helm team, if I'm wrong, there will be no money exchange for participation in these programs. Obviously, each university will manage these programs in their own way. And also, just to make a comment, Roy, on the fact that it hasn't been predetermined that the entire Helm program will be online. We are doing these workshops online at this particular juncture because of a number of issues, including COVID, but also it's effective, seeing we are dealing with an efficiency, and we are dealing with universities and institutions dotted around the whole country. It would be logistically a much bigger exercise and a much more expensive exercise to constantly bring people together. And also in terms of time, I mean, people, it's easier to take 4 hours out or 2 hours out for a workshop online out of your very busy schedules than to have to travel to a central point, etc., etc. So for the ease of our engagement, this will be happening online. I have to say that this entire program was in fact planned long before COVID. And initially it was actually conceptualized, the workshops were actually conceptualized as being face-to-face. These kinds of workshops, like today's workshop, were conceptualized as face-to-face, but that has changed since COVID. And actually it has a number of benefits, because it definitely is more efficient than, you know, having to travel across the country to meet. But how the actual training and professional development, ongoing professional development is offered within institutions might not always be online. It might be a combination of online and face-to-face. Nazreen?
Hi, hi, thank you so much. So what would be the distinguishing feature between the program that we are involved in designing now as opposed to the postgraduate diploma in higher education? That some institutions have accredited already.
Yeah, okay.
Marilla?
So, yes.
Could I answer that if you don't mind?
Please do.
Right. Nazreen, this has been conceptualized as a short learning program. So at the moment, and I mean, this will also be influenced by the way this process unfolds and the discussions that we have, but it has been conceptualized as about a 3-month part-time program, as a short learning program. So one of the things that we could discuss as part of the, I suppose, planning and rollout, because we do talk about some of the features of the program in future workshops, will be to try and then determine what that relationship might be to, say, the PG DIPS. However, a 3-month short learning program is not going to, pardon me, be at, comparable in any way. If we think that there should be some, I suppose, what would articulation points, perhaps, access entries into the PG dips and so on, then those are the kinds of things that we must be that should be discussed. But this really is, you know, a taster. And if you look at the groups that universities have put forward of the 900 lecturers, we said in the workshop 2 weeks ago that about 80% of those are NGAP lecturers. So we need to craft some of this into our discussions. Hopefully that answers your question somewhat. Denise, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that point.
Yes, I'm just worried about Marilla's time frame. I've just sent a question to ask her if it's okay that we just dwell on this for a few minutes, just because I think these are really fundamental.
Sure. No, definitely.
Queries. Is it okay?
Definitely.
Okay, great.
Definitely.
Just because I think these are really fundamental questions about why are we even doing this? And I think what this program is offering that is different to what may already be happening at your institutions, and something that you will all be a part of, is that it gives us the opportunity to do a sector-wide program where, first of all, participants who are in this program, like yourselves, but in future, where the lecturers themselves who come on, they will be able to form networks across the whole sector. So that's the first point. It's giving us the sector-wide ability to connect with each other as teaching people who are involved in teaching and learning across the sector. And there are a number of advantages to that, the collaboration, as well as consistency, as well as the kinds of questions and challenges that come up for us across the sector. The second piece is that it's being co-constructed by all of us who are part of these workshops at the moment, which again gives it a kind of a consistency across the sector, which at the moment is not happening. So to the question posed by I think it was it Nirmala or I forget, no, Nazreen. Yes, there are many PG dips, PG HEs that are already taking place in institutions, and we hope you'll be able to draw on some of the best of those to incorporate into this. But our lecturers in this program will be people who have just started out lecturing. It will give them sort of the most updated sense of what can be done in the sector. And also it will introduce things which are really just cutting edge. I mean, the whole issue of how does one humanize a digital space? I don't know to what extent this is happening at your institutions, but these are things that we're going to be considering in relation to fundamental principles, design principles as well. So it's really about being a sector-wide project that is quite groundbreaking, just by virtue of that fact, but also by virtue of the things which are going to come up as immediate challenges that people are experiencing in the sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Nirmala, you've had your hand up for a long time, and then afterwards, see in the Bele, but Nirmala.
Thanks, Marilla. I'm not putting on my camera because I'm not camera, ready or whatever. So just two things from me. The one is that my understanding of this program is that it's almost equivalent to an in-service program. So it's not accredited, etc. And I think also the pace, the environment, etc. will be quite relaxed in some way. So there's no assessment. I'm assuming there's no assessments per se for lecturers who, well, no assessments that lead to whether you pass or fail the course, etc. And I think that could make a difference to how people's appetite for this program going forward. I'm not sure if it's a program, but maybe we need to find the correct terminology for this, for whatever it is that we're doing. The second one that I have an interest in, and I've heard this term being used quite often now, is to improve teaching and learning. So I'm wondering if there has been some study that has been done or some information that we have that tells us that we need to improve. And that's just out of interest. Thank you.
Okay, if I can just respond very briefly to Nirmala. I think your conceptualization of it as calling it in-service is correct. I mean, it is continuing professional development. It's unlikely to lead to any actual qualification. I mean, that is actually one of the principles. When I said we will talk about, the actual fundamental principles that underpin this course, that is one of the ones that we will need to discuss and agree on together. But indeed, it's unlikely that it's going to lead to any kind of accreditation. I suppose one might consider maybe small components of it or modules might in the future be used to build to accreditation in some other program, but the purpose of this particular initiative is not to develop accredited qualifications. So you're quite right about that. In terms of the purpose, which is to strengthen teaching and learning, and that is the explicit purpose, I think there are two things that evidence the need for strengthening teaching and learning. And that is, there are numerous studies that probably throughout the world, but indeed particularly throughout Africa, the predominant way of teaching at higher education institutions is still very much the traditional lecturing mode, the transmission of content. And if we engage, which we will look at today, at how people learn, transmission learning is not the most effective way of learning. And it's appropriate in certain instances, but not in all instances. And there are a whole lot of other approaches to learning that produce evidence, and we'll in fact be engaging with some articles about that today, that a different range of engagement is more effective for teaching and learning than a transmission lecturing mode. That in the first place. And in the second place, if we look at our pass rates throughout our institutions, I think that speaks for itself. Pass rates are not where we would like them to be, or throughput rates are not where we would like them to be. And we need to support students to succeed. So mission of institutions is not just to provide access, but also to support students to succeed, to be successful. And there are a whole number of factors. It's a multifaceted number of issues that play into what supports students, but certainly at the heart of it is good teaching to promote good learning. So I think that that really is the core of the matter. I'm going to take these last two questions, and then I think we do need to move on. So I don't know if it's Mr. or Mrs. Ndebele?
Clever, yes.
Clever. Hello. Welcome,
yes.
Clever.
Yes, I just wanted to comment that while we have these postgraduate diplomas in terms of satisfying the requirements in the sector, their enrollments are really quite small. For example, here we're looking at initially starting with 900 academics, and already we are reaching more. And also just to indicate that this project also, I see it gelling very well with the DHET initiative titled the Enhancing National Framework for Enhancing Academics as University Teachers, which also seeks to look at interventions that reach the whole sector. And in terms of studies, there's one particular study that was undertaken here in South Africa, for example, which resulted in the CHE monitor number 14, titled Learning to Teach in Higher Education. There were more than 8 universities involved. And what came out from that study was indeed the need to enhance academics as university teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Clever. Shabosh, is it Seboshi? Seboshi, would you like to ask your question or make a comment?
Hello, am I
We can hear you.
audible?
Yes, you
Okay,
are. Thank you. Go
Thank you.
ahead.
Just that I'm not used to Zoom. I'm used to Teams. Good morning, colleagues. My understanding is that for us to be at this course, it means we are going to be providing the support to those that are doing postgraduate diploma in higher education. Because my understanding is that for anyone who's doing postgraduate diploma in higher education in any way, in any education program, one needs to understand how to design programs. Also, my understanding is that not everyone within the institution can register this for these postgraduate diplomas. However, as people that are trained trained by you, we can be able to provide interventions within the universities such that you can be able to enhance the teaching and learning. Because if you look generally, most people that comes to higher education, they do not have a teaching background. So they come new from classes, and then when we get here, we are supposed to be providing with a professional way of how things are done in a classroom. That is my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuboshi. So thank you. I think you make an important point there about saying that many lecturers, don't come from a teaching background. And I think that that is a key way of sort of framing this program. I'm also responding to what Shabar has said in the chat, which indicates that we shouldn't be looking. Somebody's got this, if sound on, thank you. Alan, I've noted you. I just want to say that I've noted what has said by Shabar in the chat about, not framing this as a deficit model, and that there is lots of good practice. And of course, this country is a vibrant and country with a vibrant higher education sector with some amazing programs and individuals engaged in those programs, but we want to build on that. And however good any program is, and however good any design is, and however good any teaching practice is, one can always be better and look at other alternatives. So I understand the idea of not, coming from a deficit point, but equally, I think we always need to acknowledge that there's always room for improvement and growth and creativity. Alan.
I just want to make a comment. I've always said that most of us, when we start teaching, teach the way we were taught, and most of us were taught badly. So we know that there are exceptions to that rule, and I think what we try to do is to give people other ways of thinking about things.
Correct. Thank you. Good. So I think we should stop there. It's great. I mean, I'm pleased. I think this has been a good start, because it was worth spending this time engaging, and especially at the outset, there are naturally going to be issues and queries and questions that people would like to engage with, and it's important because these set the foundation for us to proceed. It's not easy to kind of take the next step if you're lacking in clarity around certain issues. So We will try and pause for clarifications and questions and comments and reflections as we go. It does, of course, mean it takes a bit more time, but I think it's a good investment. Right. So now I'm going to share the actual web-based workshop with everybody. And let me see, get into the Zoom and make sure that we are sharing properly again. Right, can everybody see this?
Yes, thank you.
We can.
Okay, that's really great. So I want to commence by introducing you to this program, and then once we start actually engaging in the activities, which we will do quite shortly, you will need to actually click on the link yourselves, because you can't work in the version that I am projecting onto the screen in this workshop. You will have to work in your own version. And the first activity which we get to, you will need to actually go into your own link, open up this program that we are looking at now, and then we will move shortly into breakaway rooms, and we'll engage with the first activity in the breakaway rooms. So let me just move down here and say that this program, what I actually want to show you before we start looking at the content is just something simple, and that is about how we access some of the documents in here. Now, this first document here, lecturers aren't just boring, they're ineffective too. So with apologies to everyone, obviously we appreciate that not everybody is ineffective. This is actually an American article, but what this article does speak to is particularly the problem of lecturers who do engage in the lecturing stand-up and lecture mode rather than in a more engaging active mode of teaching. And it's quite interesting because it is based on a range of studies that were undertaken by the University of Washington in Seattle, and it particularly deals with students in the STEM programs, and it's quite a carefully structured study, and the two original articles are provided here in these two links. The article that I want us to look at, which is I'm calling just a quick read because it's a short journal, a short article written by a journalist on these two studies. So we're not going to engage with the two studies now because it'll take too long to read through two long papers. So we will just be looking at a quick synopsis, a very potted version of the key findings that came out of these two studies. However, what I wanted to say about this link here at the moment, and well, let me just click on it, is that when you open a link, you need to right click to open the links and go into open link in a new tab. And then it creates the tab for you at the top. And I'm mentioning this because if you just click straight onto the link, it will open. But if you click straight onto the link and then you want to come back into this program, often it will take you out of the workshop program. So it's important to open it by clicking and opening the tab at the top. And it opens on this page. when it opens on this page, you will see here it says lectures aren't just boring, they're ineffective too, the study finds. Now, this is a journal that one needs to subscribe to. And you are allowed to read this article 5 times without paying the subscription. And if you've opened it more than 5 times, then you get this little message that I've got here at the bottom, which basically tells me that I can't access it unless I pay whatever X number of dollars for it. So unfortunately, when I was busy designing this program, I opened and closed it. I didn't register that I could only open it 5 times. So I opened it and closed it, obviously 5 times. And now I actually cannot access this particular article myself, but you will be able to. So when you open this page and you get this article, you will be able to access it. So I'm just highlighting that point. I cannot demonstrate this article to you now, but you will be able to get it. Now, to go back into the workshop, all you have to do is click on this tab. Don't go out, don't press these arrows here. If you go out of this arrow here, you will go right out of the workshop program. So remember to go in and out on the tab, and then you come back to where you want to be. So that was just a brief little bit of technical support. I'm sure most of you know this better than I do, but just that step of opening the tab is actually a useful one. So now if we move down here, looking a little bit about, why we are, and I say bothering in inverted commas with learning design, I think it is an important principle to acknowledge that the way that learning is designed has a direct impact to how students learn, and it enables, the better the design, the more enabling the learning environment is. And that is why it is really important to spend time engaging with this issue of learning, of actual learning design. So I would like us all to read this article just as a way, as a stimulus to thinking about what we are going to be doing today. So I would like to spend just 10 minutes on that. If we could set up the groups, there are now, wow, 35. I wasn't watching the participant list growing and growing while I've been talking and talking, but I see there are 35 people in the, so I don't know how many we should have. Maybe is 7 groups possible? Is that doable?
Marilla,
yes.
That's 35 including us, so it's 30. I've created 6 breakaway groups that will have 5 people in, if that's okay.
Can we be in the groups too, please, Michelle? Can I be in the group as well, please?
But we'll be able to join the groups as we need to. So I've kept us out of it. Yeah.
Okay.
But you'll be able to join. Right. Shall I go ahead and assign everybody? Shall I go ahead?
Yes. So if you could assign everybody to a actually, sorry, Michelle.
Sorry, I was just trying to find the person who was not muted.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Well, I'm just sorry. I'm just thinking about something different. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We are not going into groups now. We are this is just the stimulus activity. We'll go into the groups actually for activity 1, which is the next activity. So for this, what I would like people to do, however, is to click on their links. So individually in your offices, at homes, wherever it is that you are participating from, click on the link that Michelle has provided. Open the page to ensure that you open on this page here, and then go to this link here, click on it, and if we could just take 5 minutes to read this short article. So this is all of you doing this individually, opening your links, clicking on this one, and reading this short article. You're obviously welcome to look at these two as well, and they will be here for you to engage with, but I think that at this point it will take too much time to read two full research articles, so we're doing the potted version just to get us thinking. Is everybody okay with that? 5 minutes. So it's now 9:40. Namala? Good. So 5 minutes, 9:45. We'll move to the next activity, and it will be in the next activity that we go into the breakout rooms. Has everybody been able to successfully access the link? Is there's anyone who's struggling, can't open this? Please let us know. Thanks, Namala. Hope everyone else is managing as well. One more minute. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I hope that's been enough time for you. Just at least the idea was really just to skim that article and get to the gist of it, which is interesting because the claim based on this study is that students that that active learning really does help to boost student success and reduces failure, particularly in the STEM subjects. And I'm sure it's equally true of all subject areas, but this particular research focused on the STEM subjects. And yes, concludes that the failure rate of people of students who were engaged in a more traditional transmission style of learning were definitely higher than students who were enabled to participate in a more active, engaged way in their own learning. And I think, the purpose of this was obviously for us just to kickstart our own thinking about active learning and engagement and activity-based learning and authentic learning as a useful approach to enabling and enhancing the learning experience. A question that I wanted us just to look at and consider here is whether there's any difference between being lectured at in the classroom versus being lectured at on the computer screen. I don't know if anybody would like to just reflect. Reflect on that statement. If anyone would like to make a comment about it.
But a lot here,
Yes.
well, according to their research, there's no difference. If you look at the last, at the end of that article, last part of the paragraph.
So if you're using a lecture mode, whether you're on the
whether it's online, if I understand you correctly, whether it's online or in the class, the outcome is the same.
That's correct. Okay. Well, I think that is very much the point, and that is why we have sort of said at the outset that the way one designs one's learning underpins the nature of all learning, regardless of whether it's face-to-face or online. And that is quite important. And I think, again, I don't want to take away from Alan's workshop next week, but that is certainly a key point that he will make, that for a long time, there have been people, I'm not suggesting all people, but some people who somehow imagine that technology is somehow the panacea and is going to make learning happen. And it's not the technology that is at stake here at all. It's the learning design. And so it's just to clarify that particular point. Okay. Moving on and just looking then briefly at the objectives of this workshop. And we will be really focusing on exploring learning and the foundations of learning and teaching. And the workshop itself is really intended as a practical guide to looking at models that promote a social constructivist approach to learning design and are based on an activity-based approach, and that promote collaboration and promote and enable contextually relevant learning. I think that is really what today is about. And that we will be doing that through engaging with some of the structured, there's some input, some text, some readings, and engaging with these concepts through some of the activities that we will be doing today. Because of the constraints on this workshop, if I was doing this workshop in a face-to-face mode, I actually would have taken a day to do it. We would have obviously had tea breaks and lunch breaks, and there would have and so on. So it would have been spread out across the day. Because we've sort of truncated it into an online version, we've had to adjust it accordingly, so we won't necessarily engage with activities, extended activities in the way we might have done in a face-to-face context, but we certainly will be engaging in some actual activities and discussing them and providing feedback, so that this is not only a sort of one-way talk shop. And in terms of the readings, as I've said before, because you now have access to this website, you'll be able to go back and do the readings, engage with them more fully at your leisure, because, and when you've got the time, because we certainly don't have the time in this workshop to go through full academic articles and so on. Namala, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, no, actually a comment. Thanks, Marilla. So for me, it's very interesting. I trained in the 80s and I'm a teacher by training. So I went through the whole, teaching, whatever. And I must say that at that time, we had a really, really good lecturer who actually, I think, laid really good foundations for us in terms of interactive learning. So for me, this is, nothing really new. And I've done this for the past 35 years, perhaps, where I realized that students and learners should be involved in their own teaching, because we know the whole thing that Confucius says to us, what I discover, I understand, etc. So I do get a bit surprised when I realize that this is not true for everybody, for example, because I would expect, or in my own little cocoon, I thought this is what everybody does. And definitely, I think for me, for example, using online has been in a large class has been quite beneficial, because I'm able to get better engagement from the students, because they're excited. Technology is something that they are so familiar with, etc., compared to being in a traditional, or compared to being in a face-to-face classroom, because I teach a class of about 730, of course, about 200 attend, but it's very exciting for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Noma. And the reason you are here and all the other colleagues in the room is because you already know this stuff. And I suppose what we are trying to do is to really confirm amongst ourselves that this is the approach, because as I indicated in my introductory remarks, we're trying to actually agree on an approach, and we are therefore revisiting, if you like, the benefits of active learning and activity-based learning, so that we can ensure that we are on the same page, and this will be a principle that we all agree will inform the way we proceed with designing our learning programs. Shobha, your hand is up.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm reading that article, and it ties back to the point I was making a little bit earlier. I'm also from the late 80s, 90s kind of campus going, but not in teaching, especially. But I would think there'd be a time, and there used to be a time, where a lecturer will stand up and read for an hour. I must honestly say, I am at DUT, I'm in academic development. So there might be a lot of talking that happens by a lecturer now, but I can't seriously say that at DUT there is the way that article was describing lecturing as lecturing. So I think in our deliberations that one of the things we need to actually think through as well is the concept of lecturing, because lecturing, does it mean stand and deliver? Does it mean, because I think the term has evolved, and I think sometimes what we do when we read up these things is that we tend to bring them all to mean the same thing. So you can have lecturers taking quite a center stage in not taking, but leading the discussion or leading that knowledge engagement. But that whole concept of lecturers standing and maybe reading a textbook, which happened back in my day, or just standing and talking or sitting and talking for 50 minutes without any input from students, or without an exercise, or without a quiz, or without something. I cannot see that actually happens at my institution. What might happen is that there's a lot of talking, and maybe that we could have more activities. And, you know, maybe like the suggestion was those clickers those are just very simple activities. And to some extent, you know, whether it's a 1-minute paper. So how might we now encourage student participation? The two things I'm just raising that has popped in my mind is the whole notion of the evolving of the concept of a lecture or lecturing. I don't think it is typical as it used to be back in the day. And the other thing is the increased participation of students. I don't think that students just are not prompted to participate, but how might we increase participation in the classroom are questions I think we deliberate about as we conceptualize this course. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaba. I mean, I'm sure, you know, the way people lecture has evolved over time. I'm sure you're absolutely right about that. However, what's quite interesting is, I don't know if some of you may be familiar with it, anyone who's in education may be familiar with this, and that is that Sadie has over the years published a series of books through Oxford University Press called The Study of Education, and it deals with various aspects of teaching and learning, and these editions that, you know, there are various editions. Some of these books are already in the 3rd or 4th edition. And the first thing that Oxford always says to us is, please prepare a set of PowerPoints to go with these books, because that's what the lecturers want. They want PowerPoints so that they can base their lectures on a set of PowerPoints. That's current. And I know that many lecturers do present PowerPoints as the basis of their lectures. And of course, they enable some discussion with students, but I think we would like to go a little bit deeper and then discussion. Discussion is important, and it really is a key, and we will talk about the value of discussion as a key mechanism or a strategy for social learning and engagement and reflection. But we also want to explore other aspects such as authentic activities and engaging in the design of those that requires students to actually apply their knowledge. So whereas I acknowledge that I'm sure in certain lecture theatres across this country and maybe more especially in universities that offer students tutorials, there's a greater opportunity for engagement, but I'm not convinced that a really active learning process is the norm or the default position in our institutions. Michelle Hatch, would you like to comment?
Yes, thanks very much. It's more just a question. In conceptualizing and designing this program, to what extent do we need to take into account the demands of different disciplines? You know, I'm thinking some might be highly technical and, I don't know, perhaps require more input from the lecturer just to ensure that all students are on board and understanding something. In other disciplines, it might be possible to have a lot more discussion with the students from the outset. And then also, in my experience, and I'm sure in everyone's experience, large classes and small classes are like chalk and cheese. I mean, some of the methods that one uses with small classes can be taken over to large classes, but it's just like very different. So those are the questions. And then I just also thought, you know, in terms of our target audience, just to have less resistance. There might not be any resistance if they're first time lecturers, but I know often it's difficult to be told how to teach from someone who's not in your discipline or isn't facing the class sizes that you face. And do we anticipate that being an issue? And if so, will we kind of address that so that, yeah, the people we are trying to help are 100% receptive to us? You know, I mean, I'm in economics, and personally, I'd find it very hard to be told how to teach my classes by someone who, you know, is maybe more in the humanities and is dealing with a smaller class than what, say, I do. I won't be completely resistant, but I'd far more appreciate someone who's in my discipline teaching my class sizes. You know, that I'd obviously attach a lot more value to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for raising those points. I think they're all extremely important. And indeed, I mean, the nature of each discipline is there are, you know, obvious differences between the sciences, for example, and the humanities and so on. And each has its own particular, you know, underpinning approach. So I think the nature of disciplines has to be taken into consideration. But I think what is important here is we're not hopefully going to tell people how to teach. What we want to do is try and give open people to the idea that they are able to design authentic activities within their own subject and discipline areas. And the way they design those will also be, to some extent, dictated to by the nature of their subject. So I would never presume to tell you how to teach economics. I come from a humanities background myself. But what I would like to share and support people with is how to design good learning, authentic learning activities and authentic assessment tasks that become part of a learning process that enables students to get a deeper understanding of their own subject area. So I hope that makes sense. And the issue of class size is also very, very important. And obviously, if classes are smaller, it's much easier to work with them. And if one's sitting with a class of economics 1, I don't know, I saw somebody participating here from UNISA. Many, many years ago, I was reviewing one of the Economics 1 courses. When I say many years ago, I'm talking 2003, so I mean many years ago. Nearly 20 years ago, I've reviewed the Economics 1 course at UNISA, and at that stage, there were 16,000 students in that course. I can only imagine now that's probably doubled or trebled. Is that right, Jessica? The course enormous.
Well, it really ranges quite a lot. So you will have smaller courses, and you will have 20,000 plus as well. So from our experience at UNISA, I've taught from less than 100 to over 3,000 to 4,000. And you have to adjust your approaches based on the number of students you're teaching. It's so much easier to customize their education if it's a smaller class, to bring in more authentic learning activities for them if it's smaller, versus, one size fits all when you've got 20,000. So how to balance that is always a point of difficulty at UNISA, but it lends itself to a lot of experience as a result.
Right. Thanks, Jessica. So, I mean, UNISA is maybe an extreme example. I mean, it's referred to as a mega university because it, is so large. I think it has close on 400,000 students, if I'm correct, if I'm not mistaken. But all our universities have certain, even our contact universities have certain classes that are particularly big. I was hearing that at UCT, and I stand to be corrected, but again, that particularly in economics, I think that when economics 1 is offered, that 2 or 3 lecture halls are used at a time, and that the lecturer stands in one and a video projection is made to the other 2 halls. I mean, if there's somebody at UCT who wants to, elaborate on that, you're welcome. But that is my understanding, that we actually reaching those kind of proportions in some courses in some of our institutions. And what we really need to tackle here, as Jessica says, of course, we're not suggesting a one size fits all, but there are certain principles that we want to look at, and those principles, I think, and that apply to how one would actually really develop a meaningful activity that is engaging and that is authentic and that promotes learning, is one that one can, if one designs well, can apply on a large scale, because students can be working on their own or in groups and working collaboratively through these processes, even if there are a few thousand people doing it at once. It can be done. So it depends on how the task is designed in the first instance. But and that is something that we will obviously need to engage with in a huge amount of detail. Here we are just really looking at a very, very high level of the principles of what can be done and what we would like to do. How we actually do it, or how the team does it going forward, in how they design the content of these courses, is the next and important challenge. So moving on, if people don't mind, would like to carry on, I've put up the slide to say that for this workshop, we have developed a very simple framework, basically including these 5 questions. When one's thinking about design, where do we start? It's a pretty obvious opening question that addresses things such as planning. When one is developing any program, course, module, set of materials, teaching materials that support a course, obviously they need to be properly planned. One would have to think about all kinds of things. Is this part of a program that's for certification or not? I mean, in our case, it won't be. Most probably, you would need to think about the mode of engagement, the mode of provision, the kind of agree on teaching strategies, agree on resources and tools that you're going to do. There are a whole lot of things that one would think about in the planning process as one starts. Then the next question would be about what do you want your learners to actually learn? And after that, how do we want them to learn? So the learners in this case, again, I'm reiterating, the learners in our instance are the lecturers that we are going to, for whom these courses will be developed. And linked to what we want people to learn, obviously we need to think about how we want them to learn. And that really speaks to question number 3, the pedagogical approach or the teaching strategies. How will we embed support in the actual design of the courses and in the design of the materials that we prepare to enable the learning to be successful? And how will we know if learners have learned? So that speaks to assessment. And as somebody quite rightly highlighted earlier today, we may not be talking necessarily about formal assessment, but we definitely would propose to engage in a range of formative activities and assessment tasks, because although we're not going to pass or fail anybody, we are trying to ensure competence in teaching and ensure that people have grasped the particular concepts, internalize them, and can actually apply them. So these activities will help that learning process. And then the fifth question pertains to quality assurance. How does one actually step back and review and evaluate the nature of the course that you have designed to ensure that it does actually meet some basic quality criteria? So today's workshop is actually divided into 5 sections and each section attempts to answer and discuss these 5 questions as the overarching frame to the workshop. So we're starting with number 1, question number 1, where do we start? So that's the planning. And whereas I've said that obviously an expanded planning process would entail a number of components, which would include thinking about what mode you're going to use, what strategies, what resources, etc., how you are going to align a course, and this is something that we will have to consider if we are end up designing a set of courses. I'm imagining it's not just going to be one course or having a set of components. How do they build on each other? How do they interrelate to each other? Those are the kind of issues one needs to engage with at the outset in the planning process. And in particular, and the one that people also stressed very largely in our first introductory workshop, which we had on the 26th of April, and that is the issue of context. And when we are talking about context for students, and I'm now talking about the students we teach, not the lecturers, this is something that needs to be top of mind in our teaching and learning engagements. And I think, again, COVID pointed to this very, very starkly, that many students find themselves who couldn't be on campus and had to learn remotely from their home contexts, found themselves in quite challenging circumstances. The whole issue of access to digital devices, the access to data, these were large challenges for many of our student population. But over and above that, there are other contextual issues which include, a space to study, electricity, and so on. Not for everybody, but there are a range of contexts that need to be considered. So in the same way that we need to consider the contexts of students that are taught, I think we need to stop and think a little bit about the context of the people that the ULDP program is going to target, i.e. our lecturers. And what are our lecturers' contexts? Now, because they are lecturers, they are attached to universities, and I assume, or pretty much that one can assume, that everyone at university has access to digital devices and to the internet and so on, to connectivity, so that maybe those aren't the biggest issues to consider. But on the other hand, there might be many lecturers who haven't had a huge experience in working online. So if, for example, one of the modes of delivery of the ULD program is going to be online, then what do we have to consider to ensure that everybody is enabled to learn comfortably online? I thought it was, for example, quite interesting during COVID, a colleague who I happen to know who teaches at WITS, and she's person who's been teaching for 30 years or more, and really absolutely fantastic dynamic lecturer in her field, but has had absolutely no experience in online teaching. And when COVID came, she was really, really stuck because she had no clue how to start putting her course online. And the solution in her instance, which was really, really nice, was that she worked collaboratively with a younger lecturer who was very tech savvy and who could do it easily. And they worked collaboratively to produce a really rich program with the one lecturer's content and methodology and the other person's technical support. It was possible to do it. But these are the kind of contextual issues that one does, that's an obvious one. Need to think about, one might need to think about time. I mean, how much time do lecturers actually have to engage? So I want us to start, and this is the first activity, and this is where I would like us to go into a breakaway room for about 10 minutes. And that is just to try and think about understanding the lecturer's context and thinking about, how one would determine what would be the most appropriate mode of provision given our lecturers' contexts. The task will be then to look at this profile tool. Once you are in your breakout room, you can open this link. And what I am proposing is that one person opens in your breakout room. You will be in small groups of approximately 5 or 6, that you agree in your room who will be the scribe, and one person then opens this document and shares it in your group so that you can all see it, and that you can consider these factors that appear here on the left-hand side, in the left-hand column, the lecturer's profile, the nature of the subject that is being taught. And this is the point that Jessica made earlier, that one needs to think about how one deals with this. It's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. And look at some of these criteria or elements of context. Think about them. What does this, what would the lecturer's needs be in relation to these particular issues? And what would the implications be for one's design? Space is left here for you to add additional elements. I'm not by any means suggesting this is exhaustive. This is simply this is simply indicative of some of the possible things that one might like to take into consideration. In these Word documents, one can get out of them quite simply by just closing them again, and then it takes you straight back to the web-based workshop. So I would like people to go into their groups, and here is an example just to show, if you're thinking about online experience, if somebody's never taught before, what has to happen? So this is just a simple table to help us to focus our minds on the fact that the target group context also is important and needs to be a serious consideration in any plan that we put forward. So it's now, call it 20 past, it's 19 minutes past. If we could come back at past. I can ask our support team at Helm to put people at random, so you're going to be mixed up with people from different universities, not necessarily from your own institution, and to just have one person scribe and type in directly into the form, so that we can then share it in plenary after we've had our tea break. So if we can go into our groups now for 10 minutes until 10:30.
All right, Marilla, I'm going to do this. And to everybody, please accept my apologies in advance. It's the first time I'm trying this. So I hope it'll work properly. If any of you can't go into rooms, I can manually assign you. We've had this problem before. Sometimes, depending on what device you're using, if you're on a phone, it might not allow you to seamlessly transition, but we'll work on that if you can be patient. All right, so I'm opening all the rooms and hopefully you should all disappear into those.
Well, we've seen the rooms have all come up and people's names, people have been asked to join
Yes,
particular rooms. So that's all very
yes.
clear, Michelle. Thank you.
All right, and I see some people have disappeared. If you've got a problem, just let me know.
I don't see myself here. Can I? Oh, it doesn't matter.
Marilla, you should be able to click on a room and join it. As I understand it, that works.
Okay.
We didn't assign any of the co-hosts
Okay.
so that you could easily be able to move between rooms.
Great. Thank you.
Are you okay, Marilla?
I'm okay. Thank you. Are you okay?
Yep.
Is it okay is the question.
No, I think we just need to push on a little bit, otherwise we're going to get stuck.
We are. Yeah, I'm afraid we are going to have to push. Yeah.
Okay,
so we're
so
going
can I?
We've all had a taste of the kind of issues that need to be thought about, and it's given us a little bit of imagination for some of the issues that we would need to consider when we plan to design these courses for our colleagues, for our lecturers. So I think that that's been very, very useful, and hopefully we'll be able to agree that understanding the student profile is definitely a principle that needs to underpin our design process. So thank you very much. It's now, I think, almost 22. So I would like to suggest that we cut our tea break a little bit and have come back at 11. So we'll have 21-minute tea break, and that we can all be back together at 11. So just leave your Zooms on. You can mute or do whatever, but go and make yourself a cup of tea or walk around or do whatever you'd like to do for 20 minutes so that we can all just have a break from sitting in front of the screen, and then we'll be back at 11. Thanks. A cup of tea. Make a cup of tea. Uni Zulu is back. That's great. Welcome back, everybody. So what I'd like us to do now, because of time constraints, I mean, ideally, would really like to present everybody's initial discussions on the profile of the lecturers and the kind of needs that they have that need to be taken into consideration and that have implications for the design. We'd love to share everybody's, but because of time constraints, I'm literally just going to take one group who would like to volunteer to share their screen, put up the profile that they have saved, and just share it with the group and just speak to it so that we can just see one actual example of what came out of this discussion. So I have no way of knowing which group would like to do it. one person who was the scribe volunteer and agreed to share their document. Anyone? Great, Jessica, thank you. I was going to say, I actually popped from group to group very quickly so that I could see, and I really noticed that the discussion in all groups was very engaged. So that was really nice.
I see someone else is sharing. If you want to go ahead, you are welcome to.
Whoever got there first. Which group is this?
Tia was in it, and a few other people.
Great. So that's lovely. Will you just talk us through what your group spoke about?
Yes, and can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, we were obviously not able to go through everything due to time constraints. But when we looked at, for example, the language of the lecturers, we also thought that the language of the students should be taken into consideration. And the implications would be that in the program design, we accommodate some sort of principles of translanguaging, and which can also, or others know it as code switching, where one can be switching between the different languages. We are talking about when the lecturers teach in their classes. So the principles of design must accommodate that. In terms of the years of experience of the lecturers, we thought that though the target is for emerging lecturers who have a new generation of academics, the ones with vast experience can also be accommodated. In terms of the discipline, we thought that the implications for ULDP should be that we stay with the principles, and we remain generic. However, when you know the target lecturers, when you have been able to get some to the profile of the lecturers, you could prepare relevant examples of the disciplines that the people are present. The class sizes, we thought that we need to take into account when we design the program, the various class types, because the lecturers themselves, when they teach to quite a range of numbers. In terms of workload, most lecturers have large workloads, especially the new lecturers. We thought that there would be a need to negotiate time for this SLP with the head of departments as well as other colleagues. A lighter workload could be negotiated, and also different specific policies could be made enforceable. For example, staff development policies could be dependent on in this instance. In terms of contact blended or fully online, we thought that it could be university specific. So different universities would adopt different modes, and there will be a need to consider the mode of policy of delivery as well as the policy that could come into play. That is what we discussed, and if maybe I run short explainings or some of these items, other team members could come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was extremely well done in the very short space of time that your team had, or that all the teams had, to actually engage. Is there any other comment that anyone else from your team would like to make? Okay. If not, if you wouldn't mind to stop sharing for a moment, please. Great. Thank you. So that was really interesting. And of course, just a taster, interesting to note that as I hopped around from room to room, I noticed there were certain issues that people were tackling in a similar way and certain issues that had divergent solutions, which of course is interesting because it just makes, you know, for very rich information. There's been a suggestion that we collate all this information into one document. Alan was suggesting that people post their different documents into the chat, but which everyone is welcome to do. But I think that it might be nice, and Michelle, I'm addressing this to you now. Do you think it will be possible for Helm to take on that activity of collating the information? Because even though it's not complete, there's already a lot of interesting information happening, and it would be nice to be able to capture it and record it, because it will in a way form the basis of further thinking in the future.
Yes. So I've seen Jessica's note in the chat that she's saying that she's her teammates still need to have their input. We can load it on Canvas, but we're still in the process of setting up. So in the interim, I'd suggest that if everybody could just email me their inputs, and then we'll do the collation. And once we're ready to roll on Canvas, we'll upload everything there as well.
Right. I think what will be very interesting then is once we've got, and we know it's only the beginning, and this step is a step that would then have to be worked through fully in the actual design process, but it would be certainly a nucleus of the process. So I think that would be very useful. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again and go back to the design workshop. And can everybody see this? Jessica, is your hand up?
Yes, it is. There was just something that I find commonly gets neglected in the development of any educational program. And when you consider language, to also consider accessibility. So when you are creating any form of multimedia or doing live presentations, consider the accessibility thereof. If you have students who are hard of hearing, do you have your live transcribe active in a PowerPoint so that they can read and participate in a live discussion? Those types of things. It's very often neglected.
Thank you. A good point, and one to be considered. Thank you. Okay, so after this activity, I mean, you all now have the link to this workshop material. You might notice that at the end of the activities, this guided reflection on activity 1. And what this does is provide a drop-down menu, all very cleverly and niftily designed by Alan. And what it does here is provide some, I suppose you might like to call it teach back or feedback on the activity. So this is in particular, I'm not going to read it. You can read it later on in your own time, but it considers some of the questions of language that one might want to engage with. What are the implications for, levels of computer literacy? What are the implications for the mode of teaching provision? In other words, how will the course be offered, and so on. So the intention here is to actually get people to reflect back on an activity, but above all, in the event that your course is offered particularly asynchronously, in other words, it might be online or offline asynchronously, however it is offered, but it's offered with some kind of distance between yourself and the target group, the lecturers that are learning. there's a way in which some kind of consolidation of key concepts has to happen. And this is a reflective, consolidating process that helps people to then internalize some of the learning that they have engaged with in a activity. Jessica, is your hand up again, or is that an old hand? Sorry.
It's a dinosaur, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So you will notice as we work through this whole program of workshop materials today that after each activity, there is a guided reflection. And I'd like people to think about the purpose of this reflection and whether this is something that should in principle also be in any good learning design. Right, moving on to our second question, which is what do lecturers need to learn and how will they learn it? So, I mean, one thing that I have found, and I'm sure anyone who's designed any kind of learning courses and programs and so on has had the same experience, and that learning design process is very much an iterative one. So you start with a plan, but as you go along, your plan changes. It doesn't necessarily stay static, and you might revisit some of the components you had initially planned, or some of the sequences, or some of the content, or whatever. The same for how you teach, depending on how you, on the content selected, you might think differently about the actual teaching process. But so it's hard to, one can't just look at those 5 questions as 5 discrete questions. They are all absolutely interrelated, and one doesn't necessarily follow them in an absolute, linear or circular way, but one visits them back and forth, as I said, in an iterative way. So this question here about how people learn, what people need to learn and how they need to learn, obviously the what and the how are very closely interrelated. The what obviously has to do with important stuff like the content, what actually will you be taught, and the process for actually selecting content has to be carefully considered. What are the key concepts that one wants to engage with? How will one chunk material to make it manageable time-wise? What is the appropriate level at which the material needs to be, or the content needs to be presented? And how will you actually present it? I mean, basic things like actual layout, whether it's online or paper-based, how do you make it, structure it in a logical, clear way so that there's a clear pattern and people get used to learning in a particular way because they can immediately read the pattern. So you will notice in this particular course, everything starts the same way. There's a question, then there's some input, then there's an activity, then there's a reflection. We follow that learning pathway through this whole workshop. So how the content is structured is important, and above all, the question of alignment, one which we will eventually need to spend a lot of time on, that there is clear alignment in any course or any module between the intended purpose, the outcomes, and then the actual content, the activities and assessment. And I know that probably sounds obvious to everybody, especially people who have been teaching for years and years, but even when one's been teaching for years and years, there's sometimes slippage that happens when one puts a course together between those as those key elements of course design. And one needs to check that alignment really does exist. And then importantly, looking at the actual learning approach and the underlying pedagogical approach. And when we think about that, we visit this question of, how do people learn best? And obviously that quick read and the articles that were associated with it really promote the idea that activity-based learning is a very, very useful and successful strategy for engaging people, and that when one actually applies one's knowledge, it really encourages deep learning, deep understanding, and is actually the most useful way of engaging with new knowledge. And in this particular case, we certainly want to be able to see that application demonstrated. We'd like our lecturers to be able to ensure that their learning is more interactive in a whole range of ways, and that they are able, that they enable that kind of active learning through the design of really well-structured, well-considered, quality, authentic learning activities. So I think that in this next section, and I'm now just looking at, in the interests of time, that it would be best for us to do this particular activity, just spend 10 minutes on it individually. I mean, what we really want to look at in this is how one embeds teaching, good teaching, support, learning support into the materials themselves. And what we are proposing here is an overall approach to course design, which will be based on this, which we are proposing in this model, which is a spiral model. And I'm sure this is not a new idea to anybody. It's the whole notion of learning and developing courses as a spiral is one that goes back a long time, and there are various theorists who have written about curriculum development in this kind of way, and course development in this kind of way, and learning in this kind of way. And we are proposing that there's a logic to this, and that it is a way of systematically building knowledge, starting with framing content that acknowledges and builds on the lecturer's experience, existing experience. So we're not negating the fact that people come with an abundance of experience and ability, building on that to develop activities which people then participate in and engage in and complete, acquire and deepen knowledge through that engagement with the activities, and then build on to a reflection, or continue on to a reflection. Many theorists say that it is not the activity, but the reflection on the activity ultimately that is the learning point, and then continuing to build on to adding new content, new knowledge, and thus building a deeper and deeper or more and more extensive understanding of a particular practice or field or discipline or whatever. So I'd like people to read this activity. If we could spend, I think let's cut it down to 5 minutes in the interest of time, just individually. Everyone now has the link. If you open your link, go to this on your own, just spend 5 minutes reading through this activity, looking at these questions, and then looking at the guided reflection here, which comes after this activity, and considering how this reflection would help you, or if it helps you, to engage with the activity as a reflection process after you've looked at the activity. And then also contained here, which you can again get back to at a later stage, is a further reading that talks extensively about the value of active learning, of this kind of spiral approach to course development and the value of reflection. Article was written quite a few years ago by Professor Ian Moll, who is still currently teaching at WITS. And I think that, and one of the Sadie colleagues, Sheila Drew, but I think even though this article dates back, I think to the possibly the early 2000s, I think the principles in it that remains seminal and which are still current today. So if I can give people 5 minutes to look at this activity, think about answering the questions yourself, and you can answer them for yourself on a document. I'd like to suggest that maybe everyone opens a new folder, folder on their computer called, the Helm ULDP workshops or whatever, so that when you do these kinds of exercises and we have templates and tools, you can download them and save them into your folder. If you actually fill them in and complete them, you can keep them for future reference. You can also download any of these articles out of this website and have them for your reference. And that you also use this as an opportunity to jot down your own thoughts and reflections. I think that Michelle will at some point actually talk about the idea of possibly of a learning journal, and it might be the beginnings of a learning journal if even though you only have 5 or 10 minutes to look at an activity, but to just jot down your initial responses, thoughts, questions, criticisms of the activity or approach, and just have them in an ongoing document that can become part of a reflective journal in the future. So can I give you till 11:31, 5 minutes to look at this activity and to look at the guided reflection that follows this activity. Are there any questions? Is there anything anybody would like clarified before you go into your links? Okay, everybody, I know it's a short time, but I hope you've had time just to at least consider these 3 questions here as you look at the learning spiral that has been proposed as a framework, if you like, for developing a course, and continue to look at these questions here. What kind of support is built into this model? And then to reflect on it. I was wondering, did people have time to read the guided reflection that has been included here? And if so, would anybody like to comment just on the guided reflection as a mechanism to follow an activity in a learning design? And again, as I said, this could be for online learning, or one could use the same mechanism in a face-to-face presentation and face-to-face discussion where people engage with an activity and one has some way of then discussing, reflecting what has come out of it. Is there value in this? Do people think this works? How could it be done differently? How could it be done better? Jessica.
Thank you. Now, I was reflecting on it obviously also in my own context, and especially how student support was built in. And I noted how we're using the social constructivist approach, but every now and then, and based on our previous activity, you can see we are scaffolding from the previous activity. But I thought to myself, we have a range of lecturers that will be taking part in this program, from complete novices to, we probably have some more experienced and tech savvy and online savvy lecturers as well. And when it comes to the guided reflections, I thought to myself, there's opportunity to draw a little bit from the connectivist side of things as well. You know, you're new to the field versus your more knowledgeable participants. They can use those peers as reference points as well. So it's not just going to be me as the main facilitator guiding their reflections, but the peer students as well can act as experts in their own areas. So it really becomes very collaborative in the feedback and the reflection, but also platforms. In what platform is this guided reflection taking place? Is it taking place asynchronously, as we saw while we were doing this by ourselves, and we could read the guided reflection? So I could technically do this on my own. But if we're having like a live feedback session like so, we have an opportunity for synchronous reflection with peers and the facilitators at once. And not only that, but we have other platforms like where can reflection take place? Where can the activities take place? They can take place in the learning management system. They can take place on social media platforms, be it WhatsApp groups or Kaizala or anything like that. And then also in Teams and Zoom and that type of thing. So there's quite a lot of reflections on not just the type of learning taking place, but platforms and who's actually engaging in the learning and the reflection. That's me.
Sorry, thank you very much. I think you've raised a whole range. sorry, suddenly got a frog. I think you've raised a whole range of extremely important points. And indeed, it has a lot also to do with context and the format and the mode in which the courses will be delivered. And they might, of course, be delivered in multiple modes, and therefore one needs to be flexible and adapt to the particular context in which your course is going to be offered. And I think in principle, I suppose the key point here is about having some kind of reflective process. And I suppose there is another embedded idea here, and that is the idea of this more knowledgeable other. And indeed that could work just as well in a face-to-face, or as you say, synchronously in a Zoom or online, in a Zoom type environment like this one, where one has peers engaging with feedback, or facilitating a feedback discussion. It doesn't have to be set, as it were, in a written format like this. So I think one should definitely be exploring different platforms and different forms, and also it would vary according to the particular course, to the particular set of activities that we're engaged with. So yes, one needs, I think, that as a principle as well. It has to be fit for purpose, flexible, and suit the context and the particular learning environment. I don't know if there's if anybody else would like to add to that.
You might see in the chat where Nicola was making a good point on whether the guided reflections are individual or collaborative. And then that leading on from that, if it's collaborative, how do you protect the reflection? If I'm speaking now and I'm talking about my own reflections, I might be imposing my views on your ability as an individual to form your own.
Well, I do think that, there's obviously always value in hearing more than one side and more than one view. And that, one looks at things from different sides and builds up one's own understanding in a multifaceted context. So, I don't think that can in any way detract from, the learning process. In fact, it supports the learning process.
I think sorry, I'll keep quiet.
Nomala?
Thanks, Marilla. So I want to piggyback on Jessica and Nicola's last point. I think part of what our role is, or roles are in the higher education sector, is to, and I'm making this submission at a very high level, and I'm sure people can then tease out what goes on at the bottom. So at a very high level, we want to move away from this colonial, from these colonial notions of independence. And independence, when I mean individualism. And I think the idea of the teamwork is a concept that we are promoting. And I know I do that quite often in my own classes. And I think students actually, from my own feedback with students, and I'm sure, well, the lecturers as students or learners may also appreciate that, but the whole idea and the concept of group, I think that does become very important. But I think it's going to be important also in the design of the activities, etc., to make space or to allow for the individual thinker, but at the same time, how do you bring the group into those conversations and how groups bounce off each other and learn from each other? Thank you.
Thanks. So I think, absolutely. I think, both of those can always be accommodated. And I think often even one's own individual thinking is refined in a group because when you're bouncing ideas, off others and sharing, it helps you to refine and formulate your own thinking as well. So I think that, a combination of both is always useful. And again, we come back to the idea of journaling possibly, and I know that Denise will speak about that at the end when we wrap up the workshop, but this whole idea of continuing your own learning journey and reflecting and noting some of your own thoughts is also a way of doing an individual reflection in combination with any discussions that may have happened in groups, etc. Jessica, is your hand up?
I'm so used to Teams, just being able to see it. Thanks.
Sorry. Okay. So that was a very light touch, you know, approach to really just looking very, very briefly at how learning might be, how a learning course may be structured, looking at thinking about some of, and really not even going into any detail about the selection of content, the level of content and all of that, but focusing more on how a whole learning program might be structured in order to promote a certain pedagogical approach. Moving from there, we move, I think, into this real question here where we flesh out the whole issue of the underpinning pedagogical support in the question or the pedagogical approach, I beg your pardon, in looking at the question of support. How do we support our students, in this case, the lecturers, to succeed in this particular learning? And how is it that what do we need to be able to know and do to design appropriate activities that help to mediate learning? Because that is really the purpose of an activity. Activity is not just to do something. An activity needs to be very, very well structured in order for learning to happen. And for those of you who may have started teaching in the schooling sector and who happen to have been like I did many years ago, and who happen to have been around in the immediate period just after 94, around 2000, when the curriculums were being redesigned for schools, and the whole idea of group work suddenly became fashionable, and everybody was pushing their kids' desks into groups, and just sitting in a group seemed to, in some people's heads, constitute group work. I happened to walk into a classroom where a geography teacher had put some collected some stones, and she'd put the kids together in groups of 5 or 6, put some stones on each desk, and she said, now discuss these rocks. And that was the entire instruction that this poor, bewildered, I think they were grade 7s, were given. Discuss these rocks. There was absolutely no guidance, no structure. I'm not even sure that the teacher herself knew what the purpose was. What was the outcome of the discussion intended to be? What were the learners supposed to be able to, what concepts were they supposed to be able to apply from this? These kids just sat there bewildered looking at these rocks. So that's an extreme example, of course. But I think the principle that we really need to engage with deeply is how does one actually design activities and content and learning materials that really mediate learning, that are absolutely clear in terms of their purpose and the intended outcome, that students are supported in the materials, that support is embedded in the materials to actually support the learner to achieve the outcome, and that also enables meaningful dialogue, collaboration, because I think we agree that this learning, and as previous speakers have just highlighted, this idea of learning in collaboratively, building knowledge collaboratively in a social context is extremely important. And then added to which the dimension of reflecting, being able to reflect on on the learning process in order to distill key learnings from that process. And here we put forward a notion of a model that promotes what we call the three presences. And the three presences that we refer to is the cognitive presence that is embedded in the materials, the social presence, and the teacher presence. And the cognitive presence, to some extent, I suppose one can conceptualize as the whole sort of developmental approach of how activities support cognitive development, how you build one activity and scaffold your learning by building further activities, and how working through those activities helps to create a learning pathway, a cognitive learning pathway. And the social presence, how does the learning course actually promote collaboration? Whether it's in, again, whether it's in a contact group or whether it's an online group, how do you bridge that, if it's particularly in an online group, how do you bridge that distance between the teacher and the students and each other? What kind of devices would one design into one's program? What kind of activities would one design to enable a collaboration to happen? And finally, the whole idea of the teaching presence, or some people like to call it the teaching voice. How do you mediate content? How do you, again, particularly in an online context, how does one preempt the kind of challenges that a typical learner in a particular course might encounter? I think as people who are highly experienced and expert in your own field, whatever that field happens or discipline happens to be, you will know ahead of time what students typically struggle with in a particular learning area or discipline. And if you set a task, you will largely be able to preempt what some of those difficulties may be, and you would then scaffold the activity accordingly to enable the learner to succeed in completing that task, even without you being present all the time. So this is, a strong concept that we have developed, and I'd like people to engage with it. Think about this particular activity, what we have done here, the mediation, the three presences, is an expansion, an article that expands on this idea of the cognitive, social, and teacher presence. And then there is an example, I think that's first year biology, some learning material that deals particularly with the DNA. And the idea is to actually look at this example and see to what extent this example or extract of material exemplifies these three presences in the material. So it's about really critically evaluating this biology example and just identifying where there are examples of the teacher presence and so on, and the kind of support that has been built into the materials, and to consider whether this is a useful approach to how we would think about designing our own courses. Would these kind of strategies and mechanisms be useful or not? So again, I think because of time, I mean, ideally it would have been really nice to do this in a group, but I think we should do it again just as an individual activity, and we'll keep the last activity as a group activity so that we can do something collaboratively together before we end. So instead of the 20 minutes that I'd originally allocated, thinking that we might do this as a group, can we all just spend 10 minutes just looking? The three presents article is not a particularly long it's not a particularly long document. You may be able to skim it, quite quickly and just engage a little bit with the concept. So it's really about just 3 pages or less. And then look at the exemplar learning material and just see to what extent these concepts have been exemplified in it. So if I could give people about 10 minutes to do this so that we take it, I really feel as I'm clock watching and counting to the last minute. But can we take about 10 minutes from now until about 2 or 3 minutes, 3 minutes, shall we say, past 12 o'clock, so that you can just open both these documents, engage with it, look at these questions here, be guided by the questions, or use these questions to frame your reading. Think about the reflection. You can engage after you have. I'd like you not to look at the guided reflection until you've actually developed your own reflective thoughts on the matter, but just see whether this is a good or a bad or an indifferent example of being able to embed a range of support mechanisms into a piece of learning material. Okay, are there any questions? Is anything that anybody would like us to engage with before? If not, shall we take, well, it's now literally 4 minutes, it's now 6 minutes to 12. So let's take this up till 12:05. Okay, so is all good? I think it's important also to conceptualize thinking as an activity. So although we're doing, it would be nicer to do it together, but even individually, hope that the cogs are going around and that you're enjoying the thinking activity. Does or doesn't, whether the biology example does or doesn't exemplify the cognitive, social, and teaching presence, and how those mechanisms really have been applied and how useful they are. And whether Chichi.
Thank you, Mike. I think for me, I noticed the cognitive presence for me stood out. In the sense that the students could be guided, could be taught to acquire knowledge around concepts, the DNA and everything else. To the point that the acquired knowledge could be used in a different context, where, for instance, they were expected to design by using smart art, a DNA module. So they could take prior knowledge that they acquired from one context into another, and they could also at the same time reflect after they gave their initial responses and going through a video. So I think the teacher succeeded in creating a conducive space exactly for that. But in terms of social presence, I'm not so sure. For me, it maybe social presence in terms of the teacher himself or herself. But I didn't identify any collaboration, for instance, where a teacher through various activities ensure that there is collaboration, there's working together amongst the different students. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very useful, Jessica.
I did pick up on the social presence in activity 2. The lecturer wants them to go and check on each other's responses from I think activity 1. So I did see the elements there. I also picked up, it was almost like those little gray boxes where they would do a quick reflection check. For me, that kind of acted both as cognitive, but at the same time also teacher assistive. It was like an asynchronous written version of the teacher coming in and just to check their understanding.
So I think that sort of speaks to the teaching presence, the teacher presence, as it were. Teacher being there to check.
But I also thought they kind of created the conditions for mental action and critical thinking at the same time.
Okay. Anybody else have some thoughts on this particular activity that they'd like to share? To choose your hand up again, or I'm not sure if that's still your hand or if it's a new hand. Maybe it's an old hand. So, I mean, it's interesting now, I suppose, Denise, you'd like to comment or ask a question?
Yes, just a quick one, just a very quick one. Going through that, it was obviously a biology lesson on DNA for students in the classroom, but I thought it may be interesting from the multilingualism perspective, if there had also been some words. So the explanation of terms was always in English. And I just think if we're going to bring in the multilingualism piece, it may be useful to also think about how one does translations in the text.
Very, very interesting and important point, Denise. And I think that, particularly online, that sort of, well, it takes quite a lot of work, but it's certainly very doable. I know Alan has, for example, I'm just using Alan as an example because I've seen this app. He has designed apps which include learning material, and then when you click on the word, it gives you the definition of that of a particular word or concept in a range of indigenous languages. Well, I don't mean it gives the definition in a range, a whole range in one time, but so if the dominant group was, for example, Setswana speaking, then they would, the material had the Setswana words built in, or if the dominant group was isiXhosa, then they would have the isiXhosa words. So you click on the word and the translation comes up, which is, quite a useful way of doing it. Obviously in written material, there are also ways of incorporating that, but yes, a very important, conceptual element. Right. Denise, your hand's still up, or was that an old hand? Okay, I thought you might have a further comment. As a question or a reflection on this, and obviously this is quite a simple entry-level kind of piece of content, not terribly simple, but it's not very complex, this particular extract from a biology session on DNA. But was wondering whether people felt that any of these devices and mechanisms that were actually used in this particular extract are useful and could be translated or extrapolated into the learning material, say, that we would want to design for a lecturer's professional development program. Do you see it working in that way? Is it can one apply these same kinds of approaches? I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that. And particularly apply into the designing of further professional development material. Okay. No comments at this particular point, but I think, you know, it would be worth just engaging and looking a little bit at some of these devices and seeing to what extent they are or not helpful. Moving on then to our fourth question, which is how will we know that learners have learned? And this is obviously deals with assessment. And the whole idea of identifying opportunities for assessment in activity-based learning in an integrated way and in a formative way. And at the very beginning, I think when we took a little bit of discussion at the outset, before we even started looking at the workshop material, I think various people alluded to the fact that because the courses that have been a program of courses that has been considered for professional development for lecturers is unlikely to be a credit-bearing course, is also therefore unlikely to have formal assessment strategy. One might, however, still consider the value and relevance of including authentic assessment tasks that are of a formative nature in a program like this, because at the end of the day, one would like learning to be actualized and to be able to ensure that lecturers can actually implement what they have learned. And before we go any further, I thought I would just note here, which is something quite interesting. I was looking at the CHE manual for institutional audits, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. And in focus area 4, which deals with curriculum development, learning and teaching support, as a way of ensuring that students are successful in their learning, there's this very interesting element here in which it is stated that, or a statement, I think it's called in a standard, sorry, the word I'm looking for is standard, in the CHE manual, which speaks to staff performance appraisals, promotion, and reward systems foster the improvement of quality in learning and teaching. And I thought this was particularly interesting because obviously it's the focus of this particular workshop and of the ULD program, but I think that it's important that this need is formally acknowledged. I think there's possibly still more weighting, and I think it's shifting, but I think there's over many years there was more credit weighting for research than for teaching and learning. And I know that in recent years that has started to change, and there have been awards for excellent teaching and learning and the development of materials and such like in the higher education sector. But I think that to a large extent, and of course research is important and teaching and learning should be underpinned by good research, but it's good to see that the CHE is also focusing on a standard that relates to teaching and learning. Before we look at this actual activity, I just wanted to ask Alan whether you'd like to comment a little bit on about authentic assessment. Alan has spent, I hope Alan is still with us. Am I talking?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Alan has spent a very long and illustrious career in academia in more than one of South Africa's well-known universities, and before he joined SADI, and this is a field that he's particularly engaged with over many, many years. And I just thought it'd be nice to actually just hear some of your thoughts on authentic assessment activities, Alan.
Thank you, Marilla. I think it's important to just contextualize the way that I have been thinking about teaching and learning. For those of you who don't know me, but I think most of you do, I am very much involved in thinking about the world from a Vygotskian perspective. So the interesting part for me was that very early on, I decided that I don't want to stand in front of a classroom anymore because it got really boring. I was teaching the same course over and over, like for 10 years. And so I changed it. And what I did was I changed it into authentic tasks. Now, authentic tasks must be done with people working together, and they must be complicated. It's no use asking somebody to summarize this paper or summarize this. It's of no value to anybody whatsoever. It's much better to say, read these few excerpts from papers or from whatever you want to do, and then ask them to create something different from those things. So maybe the context that I will do is the last part was at University of Johannesburg, where I was in the education faculty. I was teaching the children about use of technology in teaching and learning. So we had about 6 really difficult tasks that they had to do. And these tasks were every 2 weeks, they had to work together in a group and submit a group presentation. And then we would mark them as a group presentation. So, for example, one of the things we were talking about is how could you change the nature of teaching and learning in a lecture hall, so not having tiered seats, but maybe flattened seats, and how would that change the way you would think about teaching? So these were third-year educational students. And at the end of this, well, each authentic task was marked, and the students were given the opportunity to reflect on what they presented in the task. And this became their mark as part of continuous assessment. For the examination, they had to select 3 of the best of their group work and then write an improvement on it by showing track changes. It becomes very easy to mark 400 students' track changes rather than having to read the whole thing again. And these were all authentic tasks. So it's about thinking how you talk about assessment and what assessment was. Another example was in the course that we were teaching, some of the students as we know, when we have to have a test every time for university regulation so that you know the students are doing something. So I would set a test which would require them to understand something that they'd learned before, but not to regurgitate, but to solve another problem. And I would say to them afterwards, oh, if you missed the test because you couldn't get to campus or whatever, you could come and write it. And if you don't like your mark, you can come and write it again. The point about assessment for me is not about finding out what they know, but asking them to learn something while they're telling you what they know. I don't know if that helps you, Marilla. You're mute.
Sorry, thank you. I was talking to myself again. Thank you, Alan. I think that is very important, and I think you know, really highlights your last point in particular. Really highlights an important point, that it's not about knowing what they know, but about, you know, what people have learned, and
what they can do with it,
and what they can do with it, and how they can actually apply it. Sorry, instead of pushing my screen, I pushed the section I was we were about to look at. So in this particular section in which we deal with authentic assessment tasks, we obviously, you know, building on the fact that we require or we are proposing that we require lecturers to perform real-world tasks that can demonstrate a meaningful application of essential knowledge and skills, and that it's contextualized. And what, of course, is also very important in any learning process is that it's formative, and that the process of assessment is basically a learning process, both for the facilitators as well as for the students. For the facilitators, of course, as one sees the lecturers or the students' performance, one can evaluate and assess the areas that they are strong in, and areas in the coursework or in the program that one is presenting that might need additional attention, areas that the student, the lecturer in this instance, might need additional support in. So in that sense, it's a learning process for the facilitator. And equally, it's obviously a learning process for the student, or in this case, the lecturer involved in the course, that allows them to make an assessment of their own ability, their own progress, areas that may need strengthening, and therefore becomes, you know, part of both quite an individualized learning pathway that one can help to tailor for this particular needs of individuals, as well of course as looking at the whole group and looking at general areas that people may need additional support in. And I think what is important about designing a learning content that is based on significant and well-designed, authentic tasks is that those tasks can equally double up as assessment tasks. So a learning task is also at the same time an opportunity for assessment. Particular tasks might, excuse me, lend themselves more to assessment than others. I mean, one task might, you know, a particular task might just be around consolidating information, whereas another task might be more orientated to demonstrating actual knowledge and skills. And those are the kinds of tasks that could then be used in a formative way to do assessments. And I think, of course, as one would need to, any assessment process, even if it's a formative one, one needs to think very, very carefully about feedback and the value of providing feedback to students, and how that feedback will be provided, and what kind of mechanisms that include rubrics and so on, and how we use rubrics. So formative assessments are for learning, which is, I think, the key point here, as opposed to summative assessments, which may be of learning. It's obvious some formative is obviously part of the learning process rather than at the end of a learning process. But the whole notion of feedback and reflection, or I mean, feedback in a way is linked to reflection, is extremely important in order to distill the key learnings, and in order to structure such reflection. Rubrics are an important mechanism for actually structuring reflection. And I think that another key principle that we need to engage in is that the rubrics, or whatever criterion, whatever format one wants to present the criteria for assessment, that is presented ahead of time, upfront, when the students or the lecturers engage in a particular task, that they know what the criteria is, what the levels of performance are that are required. It should never be opaque. It should never be a surprise. People should know exactly what standard they are being required to work towards. So here we have, and I'm now really looking at the clock, because we're kind of half an hour away from finishing, and I would like us to engage in one more activity, the last activity, in a group or collaborative way, in a breakout room. So I don't want to spend too much time on this activity. I'm just trying to think how we should do this. I think possibly we should literally just spend 5 minutes reading through these two activities, just so that people, in a way that we continue the learning design of answering the fourth question, which is about, how do we know people have learned, and just thinking a little bit about these key points here, but not actually engaging with the activities, and then moving on to activity 5, which we'll then later do in a breakout session, because that will probably take a good 15 or 20 minutes, and then we need a little bit of report back, and then a few minutes to wrap up. And it's been a long workshop, so I don't want to keep people beyond the agreed or scheduled workshop time. So I think if people would literally just like to spend 5 minutes reading this section about assessment, looking at how one might identify authentic learning tasks and using them as assessment, appropriately using them as assessment tasks. There's quite a lot of information here, some readings. This is Authentic Assessment Toolbox. There are lots of very useful tools here. It's a website that you might like to explore and thinking then about the value of formative assessment and importance of feedback as part of the learning strategy, and the importance of rubrics as supporting meaningful feedback. And then looking at this possible question as well, which explores the value of providing feedback in relation to assessment, and the role of guided reflection, which I think is a very important learning point. So literally, I think leave people 5 minutes. I think to read through this section, and then we will look at section number 5, the last question, and we'll engage with an activity in a group together. So if I can give people until about 12:38, 5 minutes, just to read through section 4, including looking at, you can look, possibly looking at the content and possibly looking at the guided reflection to these 2 activities. And then we'll move on to section 5. Take a question or 2 after this if you'd like, before moving on to section 5. Looking at this properly and for looking at the resources, but again, I hope that people will spend a little bit of extra time sometime after this workshop just to look at some of the resources and think about them, because I think this is all the conceptually important foundational work that we are attempting here, and also laying the ground for the next workshop, which will deal with all these same conceptual issues, but in relation to using technology to support the achievement of some of these learning goals. In this section, which is the last section, we ask ourselves, the last section of this workshop, we ask ourselves the question, how can we assure the quality of teaching and learning? So it's the quality of teaching and learning in our own courses, the courses that we will be designing for the ULDP program. And there are some tools that have been provided here. So the one is a design tool, which is attached here. And it is really a set of criteria and elements of design that is framed by the same 5 questions that have framed this workshop. And this tool then gives one an opportunity to, if one engages with it, to reflect on the practices of teaching and learning, and really, I suppose, to use it almost, I suppose, if I want to use the word crudely, a checklist to see that the key elements of a quality learning have been incorporated into any program that we design. So we obviously will be looking at the tool in terms of what we consider to be the overall purpose, which are of this workshop, which is to look at the benefits of an activity-based learning and teaching approach, and how we have engaged with this model of teaching, which is by proposing to construct a learning pathway, which comprises new input, new content, concepts for people to engage with, and a series of activities for people to engage with and to demonstrate and apply the theory, and that these have to be aligned to the purpose and the outcomes of the topic or the subject that is the focus of a particular learning pathway, and that people continue on the spiral path, so that, which indicates increasing complexities, increasing levels of complexity, both for thinking and in a range, thinking and skills in a range of that is supported by a range of different activities, and that the assessment tasks, the formative assessment tasks, which have been identified as part of the learning process, will serve both as an assessment process and as a learning process for both the facilitators in the course and the participants, the lecturers doing the course. So I suppose at the heart of this activity-based learning design is the idea that students learn by engaging and reflecting on what they do. But in designing a course that does these things, we need to be sure that we are that we have designed it carefully enough in order to enable this particular goal. And we've put forward here a model of that we propose as a learning review. So in the same way that we think of designing our learning pathway as a spiral, we have conceptualized the evaluation or the review, if you like, of our planned learning courses should follow a similar format and contain or reflect or echo maybe a similar approach to the design approach. The review approach will also include planning the material. It will include implementing our design. It will include reflection. And of course, that reflection will be used hopefully to strengthen the material and to strengthen any sort of conceptual underpinning of the actual learning design and the enabling mechanisms that promote successful learning. So in the next activity, what I'd like to suggest is that we break into rooms. Oh my goodness, I see it's already 1:45. So for a maximum of 15 minutes, break into our rooms, break into our respective breakaway rooms, sorry. And what I'm going to suggest is that there were originally 2 activities here. And I suggest that we maybe look at the second activity. So this activity was asking you to reflect on how you would use this design tool with its set of criteria and elements to really ensure that your own design was a quality design. But what we are proposing here is that we should review this actual tool. So my plan is that we should move into the rooms, look at this tool, and actually critically examine the criteria and elements that have been recorded in this tool. And the column is, sorry, let me just open it, then people can see what I'm talking about instead of talking in abstraction here. You'll see that this tool follows the same format, asking the same 5 questions and then providing some elements and criteria, and it has a column on the right. And on the activity would be to add anything into this column that you feel is missing, any gaps that you've identified in terms of criteria or elements that are entailed in proper planning, and also consider how these criteria would actually then, how one would address these criteria, any additional criteria that you add here. The second, I'm just going to go out of this tool for a second. The second activity, which we won't get to, but which you can look at later, has also got a tool attached to it. And this is, so the first is the design tool, and this one is a design and review tool. So what it is, it's actually the same tool that we looked at a second ago. But what this tool does, it has additional elements and criteria in it you'll see it's far more comprehensive than the design tool. The design tool is like a framework, whereas this provides a lot more detail on the elements and criteria in order that to assist you in evaluating any program that you have designed. And
Mirella,
yes,
you're not sharing those documents.
oh, sorry.
No.
I'm sorry, I should have said that. I'm sorry you didn't mention it sooner. I completely didn't realize I wasn't doing that. Sorry. Here we go. Apologies to everybody. Okay. So this is the second tool. The first tool is a pared down version of this particular tool. And what it does is it has the 5 key questions going down the left-hand side, the elements and criteria in the center, and how would we address these criteria. And also the request was that to see whether the criteria were actually sufficient for evaluating and whether there were any missing or any that needed to be revised. So that was the task of the second activity. But I thought rather than reviewing, using this entirely, rather than using this particular tool, because it's extremely comprehensive and I don't think that we actually have the time to engage with it, I would suggest that we, oops, I've lost myself. I've stopped sharing. I've totally stopped sharing I've lost sorry. Okay, thank you. I thought I'd lost my course for a while. Instead of doing activity 5.2, I suggest we rather do activity 5.1, which is more manageable. Can people still see my screen or not?
No, you need to share your browser again.
I'm in my browser, but sorry, okay, I need to share. Apologies, too many documents and getting too rushed in an effort to wrap up. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, dear. Mustn't do things in a rush because then everything jumps all over the show. Okay. So I suggest we do activity 5.1 and that we just look at the design tool, which basically forms a framework for designing a course, and see whether people think that the criteria and elements that have been captured in this are relevant. If not, what additional criteria need to be added and or how the existing criteria could be revised. So we're now down to 10 minutes. So if I can ask Michelle to put us in 5 random groups for 10 minutes. If one person would just open the design tool in the group and share it, and maybe people can just look at the tool and somebody can write some notes on the criteria if they, for example, have identified an additional criteria or a criteria that needs to be revised. If you could even identify 1 or 2, and then we'll share them in the group. I think that would just be instructive for thinking about how one would go about ensuring the quality of any coursework that we design as part of the ULDP program. Okay, thanks, Michelle.
All right, I've closed 2 of the rooms because we've lost a lot of people. If you have problems, I'll try and assign you manually. So I'm opening up. You should start disappearing. Just click on join.
One of the things that we thought in our group was that it was very difficult to navigate these complex documents. And I suggested that they work with it on their own in the next week, and we take maybe 10, 15 minutes to have a discussion at the beginning of the next workshop.
Excellent idea. Yes, I mean, very, very frustrating. I mean, we would report the same from our group, that it simply isn't enough time. I mean, even looking at just the very first set of criteria, we didn't get very far because of the time limitations. And it is the documents are sort of there's lots of detail in them, and they're complex. So I think that is a good idea. I mean, I think the discussions at the very beginning of the session today, with people asking questions and making comments, was very important, and not to be missed. But obviously it has impacted a little bit on the activities down the line. So I think that if people are in agreement, it would be nice if, as a task, homework, people could look at this document, think about filling it in, and we could have a short report back session, because it will be just as relevant for Alan's session next week as it is for this one. So thank you very much. And I'm not going to talk more. We are past 1 o'clock already by 7 minutes. I'd really like to thank everybody for their participation. I see that we have lost more than half the people along the way. So for those who have had the staying power, thank you very much. And I just hand over now to Denise to wrap the session.
May I just say something to the participants? You will soon get an email where a scientific article will be attached to it. So for the next workshop, we are going to work with 5 papers, but you don't have to read all 5. You just need to read the one that is sent to you. And that will then move, we will then go through a process of evaluation of the different papers. So just be aware that Michelle will most probably send out the document to you for you to have a read and think before we have the workshop next week. Is it 2 weeks' time or next week?
It's next week.
Next week.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, Jessica, thank you. We're noting your points. Denise?
Yeah, okay. So I think people have all got to leave. So I think, just by way of ending, to say to those who are still in the room, thank you for staying right till the end and for participating in the conversations. It is clear that we have to have some continuity, even in the short space between one session and the next. Otherwise, Marilla, I fear that we'll start the next session where you've got things planned, spending the first half an hour just getting to some of those things as well. So just to say to everyone, I'm not going to say anything about the journal here. We will send out a note which will touch on some of the points that perhaps we didn't get to, including possibly a homework assignment, which is really just about looking at some of the things we didn't get a chance to go to in this session. We will also look at how best to try and incorporate the ideas that are coming from this group. I mean, it's a group with so much experience and expertise, and such a delight, to be having all of these people in one room. So Marilla and Alan, I'm sure you too want to have more engagement with people. So we'll look to see how, Oliver and Michelle, we can set up some space where people can at least deposit some things and maybe engage in some chats, but also where the conversation can be continued. So for today, all I want to say is just a big thank you to Marilla and Alan. Such exciting things. Those tools are absolutely fabulous. And I can see that people have got things they want to actually add into that, like Jessica and others in the room actually have got things they'd like to add. But today's workshop really rich and full. Thanks to everybody who stayed the whole time, and to those who had to leave, we will send an in-between communication just to pick up a couple of strands. Otherwise, we will see you all next week. Thanks to Michelle, who did the tech support today. We hope we can have some help for her next time. Just thank you, everybody, for being here. Over to you to say goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth. See you next time. Bye-bye.
the engagement.
Thank
Bye.
you.
If you'd like to show yourselves, it would be lovely to see your faces.
Nita, do you really look like that, Nita? That's a fabulous profile pic. Bye, Nomsa.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yeah,
Bye, everyone.
Keep this photographer also for me. Bye. Bye-bye.
Alan, we're going to just stay on for 2 minutes.
Yep.